approach the Are you able to hear me? Hey, hi. Okay, you still have, yeah, you're able to hear me. Alright, alright. So I've already got 2 of the pawns done. I'm gonna back up. I can move it. I don't like being short. Alright. So I've got 1, or no, I've got 2 of the pawns done. So the pawns for the chess set are going to be, little warrior jar guys. I love these little guys. Okay, maybe I should... Is that better? I have to paint 6 more of these. Probably going to be spread out through 2 separate streams just for the pawns. But I've already got 2 of them done. So I just have to... Where is it? There. Hi, John. I gotta let my incense 1 second. Okay. Okay. Incense lit. Good. Oh wait, no, you can see my Twitter. One second, my father's calling me. Be right back. Okay, so...
Hey, what's up, bud?
So...
What are you doing?
Just started live streaming.
Oh, okay. Well, you can wait till after. When you get on live streaming, grab the mail out of the mailbox. I got a credit card in there that wants you to read me the number. It's not urgent. So just do it when you're done.
Okay.
Okay? But yeah, no sweat. If you're streaming, I'll just talk a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Okay, love you, bud.
Love you. Holy voice change. I'm being fully honest, I thought I muted. Alright, I'll be back, friends. I gotta go grab something out of the box. I'm just gonna leave this here, though. I'll be right back. Hello. Hi. Here. Okay, so I'm still here. I'll be right back. I can help me down with this. I will be back soon though. Hi, I'm back for to listen. Okay. Alright. Are y'all still here? Hi. Sorry about that. I had to help my father with something. Okay.
Elden Ring is a fascinating story, but one that is extremely multi-layered and complex, from cosmic themes to a colourful cast of demigod characters. Even after all this time, the lore of Elden Ring still holds many secrets and questions, and how could there not be given the sheer scale and scope of this game and world that has been forged by From Software and George R.R. Martin? What is the greater will? How did all life come from the one great? What is the nature and role of the Erd Tree? What is the exact order and timeline of events? These questions and more are things that I still ponder to this day, and my ideas have shifted and evolved over the 2 years of me covering this engrossing game. So in this compilation lore video, I will be pulling together all of my work on Elden Ring from the past 2 years into cohesive mega videos, ideal for a long watch while you work or sleep, and perhaps in my ramblings, you will find some answers that you are seeking regarding Elden Ring's lore. This will be part 1 of 3, and given the sheer size of this video, I think you can appreciate why we split it into 3. This video will cover Elden Ring's timeline, the ancient dragons, the Carians, the frenzied flame, and much, much more, and I hope you enjoy. But before we get started, guys, remember that if you like Elden Ring lore and Souls lore, then consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel.
I never actually
Before
asked
we
that.
dive into today's Elden Ring bonanza, a word from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. With Christmas right around the corner, things are getting busy for a lot of us, but HelloFresh can help by taking care of mealtime, leaving you with more time with your family and loved ones. HelloFresh's 15-minute meals are not only convenient, but will allow you to stay healthy, putting wholesome food on the table faster than a takeaway can at this busy time of year. I don't know about you guys, but I've been back and forth to the shops too many times this December, and if you want to cut back on your errands this season, HelloFresh can help. Skip that grocery store trip and instead get fresh ingredients delivered direct to your door. Just choose your meals from the website, choose a delivery date, and bob
I was
your
forgetting
upload.
something. I forgot
If
about.
you have a social life, and please tell me what that's like, HelloFresh can help you host your parties this festive season. From delicious cold now back to the lore.
Okay, skip the advertisement. I don't want to skip that.
The story of Elden Ring is an epic one, a tale of heroes and gods, of wars and creation, spanning a massive timeline. Yet those familiar with the game and its myriad stories will know that this timeline is far from clear. It is a complex mix of events presented to us through half-truths, rumours and myth, with no clear idea of order or the passage of time. Yet after some time exploring the lore, we can get a general idea of an order of events, of certain epochs of history, of different ages in the lands between. And that is what this video will attempt to do. To present a plausible timeline that offers my perspective on the
So
order of
first,
events,
I have to use
born from my long
a
relationship
full coat
studying
of
this universe's lore.
a base
The way in
paint
which I
on the
approach
entire
lore,
body
I believe, is a logical one,
of Wraithbone.
by ordering events into different eras, with the acknowledgement that many events could easily be swapped within each era. However, with that being said, this is no easy task, nor is it a simple thing to discard my own
It just makes
preconceived
everything
notions
lighter
and ideas
underneath.
of how things fit.
Makes it
And so I'd
warmer.
like to thank Lore Hunter and Tarnished Archaeologist, who collaborated with me on this video, not only by reviewing my timeline and giving their perspectives and corrections, but also writing and recording a section each. Before we begin, one final note is that recently George R.R. Martin, well-known father of content creator Quailag, appeared on Colbert's Late Show and made a brief comment about his work on Elden Ring and mentioned timescales that helps us a bit, but I will leave that to Lore Hunter and his section on the Shattering. With that said, let us take a journey through the histories of the
Yeah,
lands
two
between
layers to this.
and its timeline. And the very first event on our timeline isn't an event, rather a state of being, the One Great. It won't be revolutionary to say that the start of Elden Ring's story and mythos appears to begin with this One Great. Hayata tells us that once, life existed in a singular form, before there were any individual life forms.
All that there is came from the One Great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair. despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame.
We do not know what form the One Great took, where it existed, or how long it existed for, only that it was the original source of life. According to Hayeta, and therefore the three fingers who are speaking through her, it was the greater will that then fractured this One Great, meaning the greater will must have stimulated this change. The Golden Star. This brings us to event number 2 in our timeline, which is the arrival of the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring, as told to us by Elden Star's incantation, which reads as follows. It is said that long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star, bearing a beast, into the lands between,
I'm gonna
which would
move
later become
this.
the Elden Ring. The
I'm
Greater
gonna
Will
mute
never
real
acts
quick.
directly, and so it makes sense that even in this act, the act of fracturing the One Great, that it will have coincided with the arrival of the Elden Ring, a medium through which the Greater Will can control the lands between. I suggest that the power of the Elden Ring, its power to influence the world, is what reformed and fractured the One Great, and thus, the arrival of the Golden Star must have happened right at the beginning of our timeline. This now takes us on to one of the first dominant life forms that would emerge from this fracturing that we are aware of, the Ancient Dragons, which also takes us into our next era. We know that the Ancient Dragons are said to have ruled in what is referred to as the Prehistoric Era, and this is thanks to any of the Dragon Protection Talismans, which read as follows. The Ancient Dragons who ruled in the Prehistoric Era before the Erdtree would protect their lord as a wall of living rock. Now, prehistory in our world is a huge period of history, roughly dating from about 2.5 million years ago to about 1200 BC, though dates do vary from region to region, as prehistory ends when writing begins, and that obviously happens at different
Hello, can you
stages
hear
for
me?
different civilizations. Regardless, what it shows is that the empire of the Ancient Dragons must have existed very early in this timeline, even before the ancient civilization that built the Ul
I've
and
never
Ul
actually
palaces, which align more
truly
closely
focused
with
on an
ancient
Elden
history.
Ring lore video.
The
I know
Beastmen
bits and
being the
pieces, but I've
intelligent
never
ones.
actually
Serving under the Ancient Dragons, another
heard the
civilization
full
arose.
thing.
The Beastmen, who we know live alongside their draconic masters, thanks to the archaeological evidence found in Farum Azula. Early human history in the real world is generally categorized through 3 main archaeological periods: the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. Through the Beastmen, we can follow this same progression of their society, first of all learning that they were once a bestial species that eventually had intelligence granted upon them, as the Cinque Dea reads the following. The design celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, symbolic of the intelligence once granted upon their kind. 5 fingers are of course symbolic
I've like
because it is the
studied
symbol of
this for
intelligent
so long.
species'
I understand
ability
everything
to
going
use
on.
tools and weapons with their hands. Beastmen Stone Age. Much like humanity's ancestors developing into the sentient species that we are today, one of the Beastmen's first steps in becoming a more complex society is marked by their use of stone tools, marking their Stone Age. We learn of their use of stone implements via the bestial sling incantation, which reads the following. It is said that in the time before the Erdtree, stones were the first weapons of the beasts who had gained intelligence. The Beastmen would then advance to something akin to our Chalcolithic period, an observation made by the tarnished archaeologists in their Farum Azula lore video, where they identify that the Beastmen burials that we find in Farum Azula are very much based upon the real-life Varna burials. The Varna burial site is a necropolis in Bulgaria that possesses the oldest gold treasure and jewellery in the world, dating from 4600 BC to 4200 BC. Now, we have placed the end of prehistory here at the beginning of ancient history, to mirror our own world's eras, as history, while not homogeneous across the world, is generally accepted to have begun with writing, the world's first instance of which was in the Bronze Age of Mesopotamia. Beastmen Iron Age. Finally, the Beastmen would make it to their Iron Age, an age defined by Wikipedia that marks the advent of ferrous metallurgy and the metalworking techniques that allowed the use of iron tools and weapons. With that in mind, we know the Beastmen began to wield iron weapons that replaced some of their stone ones, as the description of the Beastman cleaver reads, curved greatsword of colossal size, forged of dull iron and wielded by the Beastmen of Farum Azula. The blade is incredibly heavy, but well balanced, comparatively easy to wield for the damage it delivers. It is clear that the Beastmen possess knowledge.
So this is
beyond
a
human ken.
14.
So the
Let me
last
check.
line of
Here,
the
hold on.
cover is important, not only
A
for when we
roughly
talk about the
14-hour
advent of spending
video.
under the giants, but also because despite the prehistoric nature of the Beastmen and Dragon Society, it is clear that their techniques are fairly advanced, as they were able to create some wonders at Farum Azula.
I'm probably going to be here for a good 6
Farum
hours.
Azula constructed. Farum Azula
Oh
is
yeah, that's right.
described
I don't think
as
I
a
showed the
mausoleum,
other pieces on
such
stream
as
yet.
in the description of the Azula
Okay.
Beastmen ashes.
So,
It is also described as a royal city in the Old Lord's Talisman,
I'm just going to
suggesting that
keep it
this
paused.
majestic city was the center
So-
of their civilization. It is widely believed, and I share this belief,
So,
that Farum Azula
this
was once situated
is the pond.
built on the ground,
the little jar guy.
specifically in the Bay Area of the lands between,
If it'll...
adjoining to where Dragon Barrow now lies.
It's just not going to...
We know this due to the archaeological evidence found in Dragon Barrow. Firstly,
It's
the
not gonna
Great
zoom
Bridge
in.
outside
No.
Bestial Sanctum is
Or
known
focus.
as
Okay.
Farum Great Bridge, thanks to the site of
Anyways,
graves
this is the
nearby.
rook.
And indeed, it does share the
Not
same
really
architectural hallmarks as
Visible.
the royal city.
Here, no, hold on. I'll just
Then there's,
turn
of
this
course,
on
the
if I can
Bestial Sanctum itself,
reach there.
clearly a building of Azula construction, and thus it leads us to conclude that Farum Azula was once rooted to this same spot. Emergence of
Is it gonna-
humanity. It is possible that humanity had also emerged
There, what about
in this
now?
early era of the lands
Can
between.
it see detail?
Around Farum Azula, we can find engravings of human
I know you can
characters,
barely see it.
leading us to conclude that there must have been
But-
human figures at this time.
This is the rook.
While
I've got
dragons
two of
can
them.
take human form, as shown by Lansax's history, how would they even know what a
There we
human
go.
is
Oh
to
my
take
god.
this form
Oh my god.
if there was
It's
no
working.
frame of reference? Instead, I would offer
Alright.
this is the first archaeological evidence of humankind,
This is the rook.
and is made even more
God, it was the
interesting
worst part
from the
trying to get that bell to
preset
stay on down there when I was
as
printing and
follows.
removing the
the
supports.
stony face of the people
But
of
that's
the
the
ancient dragons,
rook.
among whom life is typically short.
Then the
Placiduous
knight.
Axe,
I've got two of
Elden
these.
Lord. The dragons not only ruled,
Here,
but
wait.
seemed to be the first custodians of the Elden Ring.
Okay,
having
is it
both
just
a god
not...
and Elden Lord, a mirror to Marika and her Elden Lord consorts. Ruling over this civilization seems to be the first pantheon,
I'll just...
the first god and Elden Lord,
Almost dropped it.
who first brandished the Elden Ring. For not only do we see an early depiction
And then
of
next
the
one,
Elden Ring within Farum Azula
the bishop.
itself,
The turtle
we
pope.
also learn of the dragon
We
pantheon
love
via
the turtle.
remembrance
We love
of
the dog.
Dragon Lord, which reads,
This dog's amazing.
the Dragon Lord whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the Erdtree. Once his god was
Reach
fled,
back.
the Lord
underneath.
continued to await its return. This early era was the age of the dragons, ruled over by their Elden Lord and god, beyond time. Obviously, the other interesting part of Placiduous Axe's remembrance is the fact that his god fled, the ruling god of his era, who he was consort to. This god is now gone, suggesting some greater calamity that happened to the dragon civilization. Much like when Marika disappears in the time of the Shattering, we can imagine that the disappearance of this god will have definitely contributed to the downfall of this society. Placiduous Axe now lies beyond time, and the reasoning for this seems clear from his remembrance: to preserve Farum Azula and himself for the return of their god, in their hope that they can restore the dragon civilization. Sadly, this is an event that never comes to pass, and with the god fled an Elden Lord locked behind time, we can consider the reign of the dragons effectively over. The Dynast civilization. The next oldest civilization, based on archaeology, would be the civilization that built the Ul and Uld ruins, the ancient mausoleum, and the Grand Cloister. I'm sure many are aware, but the architectural style of these buildings closely follows the styles of ancient Greece and ancient Assyrian civilizations. But it's at this stage that I will hand you over to Tarnished Archaeologist, who has kindly done a full breakdown and analysis of this ancient civilization.
Elden Ring's world is littered with the discarded and long forgotten remnants of previously great empires. The ruins of Farum Azula are scattered across Limgrave and Liurnia. The mysterious divine towers are left as remnants of civilizations with long-lost power, now barely even conceivable in the modern era. All of these evoke the opening lines of the famous Welsh poem called The Ruin, which begins, quote, "These wallstones are wondrous. Calamities crumpled them. These city-states crashed. The work of giants decaying." End quote. Written by an unknown poet as he marveled at the ruins of a prior great civilization that was so inconceivably impressive he could only imagine it was the work of giants. So it is in Elden Ring. The decaying work of giants is found everywhere, and there's no better example of this than the great and mysterious ruins of the ancient dynasty. These ruins, which are Hellenistic and early Roman in their architectural features, convey a deep antiquity to the civilization. The ruins themselves are scattered across vast spaces of the lands between, from Upper Liurnia to Schiefer River to the Grand Cloister, attesting to the impressive breadth of this once great civilization. We know about the existence of the ancient dynasty from the Oracle Bubbles description, but beyond this, there is essentially no written evidence in-game of their culture. In order to place them within the proposed timeline of the lands between, we must therefore rely on the archaeological evidence.
It's so hard not to
As
get
we've said, the architecture is a mixture of classical Greek, Hellenistic,
Wraithbone
and Roman,
color
all conveying the deep antiquity of this civilization.
on the brick.
On the specific point of placing this civilization within the timeline of Elden Ring, we can clearly see that the developers have drawn inspiration from real-world archaeology and history to tell their story. The Eternal City of Nokron is actually embedded within the Grand Viaduct of the ancient dynasty, indicating a sort of cultural continuity between these two civilizations. In much the same way you might find Greek ruins in the IRL Eternal City of Rome, as the classical Romans borrowed heavily from the culture and architecture of the Greeks. And, sure enough, you can see faint glimpses of this cultural heritage in the grave steles still scattered around Nokron. Throughout Schiefer River and the adjacent Mogwin Dynasty mausoleum, we can see these same steles depicting various animals, signifying a dominant naturalistic religion. The steles which we light to progress in Schiefer River are modeled in form off the black obelisk of Shalmaneser, a great Neo-Assyrian king, but instead of the relief scenes depicting various conquered kings, as in Shalmaneser's stele, they depict a ritual involving sacred trees. More on that in a future video, but for now the point is they clearly had their own naturalistic culture. And then there is the so-called Dynast, affectionately termed Elden John, whose crumbling visage scatters the Ul and Uld Palace ruins, and whose full form we can see in the Mogwin Dynasty mausoleum, in the subterranean Ainsel River, and in the mysterious and impressive Grand Cloister. We've delved into this previously in a separate video, but to briefly summarize, the Dynast depiction is that of an itinerant preacher, dressed as he is in humble robes and shown clutching a tablet, an object evidently of great importance to both him and his followers. The tablet is invariably split in identical fashion, not by the processes of time, but by the design of the sculptor. The lower half, lying at his feet, is a replica of the real-world Imago Mundi, also known as the Babylonian world map, a depiction of the entire world as it was known to the Neo-Babylonians. The upper half, which the Dynast still clutches, simply depicts a great tree. The combined symbolism is clear. The statues showed the discarding of the old, more polytheistic or even secular world, and the embracing of a new religion, dominated by the singular worship of the great sacred tree, a tree that literally sits astride the entire world, and is now seen to be even growing roots out of the dynast himself.
No.
The dynast, modeled off of Moses and other great prophets, is preaching a kind of tree monotheism, prophesizing the coming age of the great tree. So now, to place this all within the larger story and timeline of the game, we would suggest that the dynast lived in a time perhaps even before the building of these great Hellenistic ruins. Likewise, if the dynast prophesied about the coming of the great tree, it stands to reason that this civilization rose and fell before the first great tree, hence the lack of tree iconography elsewhere amongst its grand architecture. The dynast likely did not live to see the age of the great tree, but up above in Liurnia, at the four belfries, we do see a depiction of a figure suggestively similar to the dynast, with the similar long beard and even the similar position of his hands. Only now, the dynast is aged, and at his feet, the new tree has begun to grow. This is his prophecy coming to fruition. We'll leave the description of that great tree era to Smo for now, but rest assured, it did come. And in the end, much more so than the ruined marble columns and grand viaducts, it is the ancient dynasty's true legacy.
The Great Tree. As Tarnished Archaeologist has suggested here, I am now in agreement that there was a great tree that preceded the Crucible and the Erd Tree, a great tree prophesied by this dynast. In time, the great tree would spread its roots throughout the world, including throughout Far Missoula, where we can see the roots protruding from the earth still attached to its base, suggesting that the spread of the great tree preceded Far Missoula's skyward departure. While there is some controversy over the translation regarding Erd Tree and Great Tree, where some think the Great Tree is a separate entity from the Erd Tree, or translators like Last Protagonist who have confirmed that they are one and the same, becomes irrelevant with TA's interpretation of what happened next. The theory being that following the demise of the Great Tree, a process known in the real world as sprouting would occur, a process known to us in Elden Ring as the Crucible. But we will touch on this later, but to me this sequence of events explains the long contested differences between the Great Tree and the Erd Tree.
I think that's good
Destruction
for
of Far Missoula.
it's good for the base.
Some
of
event
that one.
evidently led to Far Missoula being reduced to a ruin that floated in the sky. And quoting the Old Lord's talisman, it is a ruin that has been crumbling since time immemorial. And indeed, these shattered remains of buildings that we find scattered through Liurnia and Limgrave appear to have come from
Since
Far
this is done,
Missoula, as the ruin
I
item
can put
description
away
reads
Rincon.
as follows.
Well, the
These
Abaddon
shards of
Black
stone
color.
are believed to have once been part of a temple in the sky. Evidently, something happened to the royal city that not only led to it becoming shattered, but also airborne. And while tackling the airborne question is a little bit more tricky, we know what contributed to it becoming a crumbling ruin. It is the result of a meteorite collision, as we learn via the ruin's greatsword, which states, originally rubble from a ruin which fell from the sky. This surviving fragment was honed into a weapon. The ruin it came from crumbled when struck by a meteorite. As such, this weapon harbours its destructive power. So clearly, the shattered remnants of Far Missoula are a result of the meteorite strike that is described by the ruin's greatsword. And if the ruin's greatsword is imbued with gravity magic, a fragment of Far Missoula itself, perhaps the same gravity magic is why Far Missoula is skybound. Maybe all of the ruins are affected by the gravity magic of the meteorite that once hit it. Onyx and Alabaster Lords. Another ancient event that we need to place upon the timeline is the arrival of the Alabaster and Onyx Lords. We learn of this via their swords, which both read as follows. A weapon unique to the Onyx and Alabaster Lords.
You give the gold around the
A
edge,
race of
which is a
ancients
darker
with
look.
stone skin,
I
are
have
said
to
have
give
risen to
it
life
a
when a
base
meteor
of
struck long
the
ago.
darkest black I could
The
find.
reason I place this here in the timeline is the fact they are considered ancients, making them of course very old, but also because it is possible that this meteor strike that brought them could have been the same event that wrecked Old Farm Azula. Regardless, we can see this unique race of beings being born a long time in Elden Ring's distant past. The Death Rites. The Erdtree in latter parts of the timeline would come to dominate funerary and burial practices, but in the ancient times, another force would hold sway over this domain. I of course refer to the Death Rites and the Death Birds. We have it implied that these practices are ancient, that took place in a time long before the Erdtree, and we get this by examining the descriptions of ancient Death Rancor and explosive Ghost Flame. The fact that Deathbirds are still symbolic of death to this day shows how deeply ingrained their influence is, and leads us to conclude that the Deathbirds oversaw the Death Rites a very long time ago. War of the Ice Dragons and the Giants. After the fall of the ancient dragons, it is implied that an offshoot species would emerge, the modern dragons. Of these modern dragons, there was a subspecies that would come to live in cold environments, in the region we know as the mountaintops of the giants. These are of course dragon kin to Borealis, the ice dragon that we actually fight in-game. At some point the dragons dominated this mountaintop, a time before the fire giants dominated it, and thus when the fire giants did come to this region and want to control it, the two species would clash, an event we learn of via Borealis's mist, which reads as follows. The ice dragons were once lords of the mountaintops long ago, until they were defeated by the fire giants and chased from the peak, and thus this marked the beginning of the fire giant civilization. The giants invent smithing. We learn the following via the hammer description, as it reads, hammer comprised of a large stone affixed to a metal handle, originally a blacksmith's tool. The art of smithing is said to have originated among the giants. This makes sense, given the Flame of Ruin is located in the forge of the giants, a forge being a hearth meant for heating metal so it can be shaped. To me it suggests that the fire giants learned of these arts via the fell god, given its association with fire. It may appear to contradict the lore we looked at earlier, with the beastmen utilising iron weapons, but I do not believe this to be the case, as the beastman cleaver makes it clear that the beastmen had knowledge beyond human ken, suggesting this weapon was created using another unknown technique, whereas the more widespread practice of blacksmithing that humans will use appears to have originated here with the fire giants. I also do place this after the ancient society that built the Ul and Uld civilizations, because the claymen of these cultures do not wield smith weapons. In fact, it appears like they are using crude stone daggers and blades. The Giants, an early astrologer society. After the defeat of the Ice Dragons, the Fire Giants would be the masters of these mountains and establish their own society and structures. But not only that, we learned that an early astrologer community developed at this time on the mountains alongside the giants. We learn this from the Sword of Flame and Night, which reads the following. Astrologers, who preceded the sorcerers, established themselves in the mountaintops that nearly touched the sky, and considered the fire giants their neighbours. The astrologer community is likely the precursor community to the Carians and the Rea Lucarians, especially since their techniques are more primitive. The idea of being closer to the stars by being up a high mountain suggests a lack of advanced tools and advanced understanding of the stars. Zamor civilization. We know that the Zamor civilization dates back quite a bit, as their armor set reads the following. These long-lived warriors, clad in biting, freezing winds, are said to have been the mortal enemies of the fire giants since time immemorial. The fact that phrase time immemorial is used suggests that the Zaymor have been fighting the giants for a long time, meaning they must have developed on the mountaintops not long after the giants did. The arrival of the Numen. The Numen are a race of humanoids from a world described as outside the lands between by Marika's hammer. In fact, it is a race that we can choose as our base appearance when creating our characters. So let's read that description now. The face of the Numen, supposed descendants of denizens of another world, long-lived but seldom born. Importantly, it says descendants of denizens of another world, meaning the Numen have been here for some time, hence placing it far back. Another reason for placing their arrival this early in the timeline is due to the fact that Queen Marika is one of their kind, as we learn via the Numen's rune, which reads the following. The Numen are said to have come from outside the lands between, and are in fact of the same stock as Queen Marika herself. So the Numen needed to have arrived, become established, before the Erdtree was even emerging, so that Marika has enough time to be selected as Empyrean. Construction of Divine Towers. The Divine Towers are somewhat of a mystery, but one thing that isn't a mystery is that they were built before the Erdtree emerged. As ELDEN, a fellow content creator, points out in his superb Limgrave lore video, there is a painting in Stormveil Castle that shows Storm Hill. Two things are conspicuously absent in this painting. One, Stormveil Castle itself is not in this painting, and we will get to Stormveil later. But number two, the Erdtree and its light is also absent in this painting. So this at least narrows it down to pre-Erdtree and pre-Godfrey Conquest. And to me, I place it closer to the giants because the architectural style of these towers is closely matched to that of the Forge. And while I'm not sure that the giants would build these, or if they actually did, the purpose of this video is a timeline, and thus the similar architectural styles to me suggest that it must fit in here in the timeline. Development of Liurnian society. We have already discussed how the astrologist community once developed on the mountaintops of the giants, and at some stage they must have come down and settled in Liurnia. The Liurnian community has had a long history, from the establishment of the Rhea Lucarian Academy to the founding of the Carian dynasty. And for all of this to have happened before the Erdtree Wars, there must have been a good long history before this, hence my justification for putting this event in the timeline. Emergence of the Crucible. In the past, I have considered the Crucible to be the force that formed at the fracturing of the One Great and was the source of all life. However, Tarnished Archaeologist has instead suggested another compelling timeline, that there was a Great Tree, then there was the Crucible immediately preceding the Erdtree, and if you remember, Tarnished Archaeologist has already discussed the coming of the Great Tree and its significance in early architecture. Tarnished Archaeologist's reasoning for this progression is as follows. There was once a Great Tree that preceded the Erdtree, which was destroyed, but from its remains and stump began a process called root sprouting, where there were many competing sprouts that were growing from the stump in an attempt to regenerate it. If you look at this artistic representation of the process, you can see that it is very reflective of the depiction in Siluria's helm and Siluria's spear. And what TA calls the Gardener statues. Tarnished Archaeologists will be releasing a video soon on this subject, and so I will leave the details to them regarding this theory. But upon reflection, I do think it is correct that the Crucible is a transitionary state for the Erdtree that immediately preceded the Erdtree's emergence, especially if we consider the Godskin Noble set, which reads, "Nobles are the most ancient apostles who are said to have assimilated inhuman physiology. Not unlike the Crucible, the Erdtree in its primordial form. The Erdtree in its primordial form is as if the Crucible is nothing more than a specific earlier state of the Erdtree. Hoaraloo's Wars. It is of course in this time, the time of the Crucible, and prior to the Erdtree's emergence, that Hoaraloo will have gained his fearsome reputation. We know that Hoaraloo was a far more brutal man than he would be as Godfrey. Hoaraloo was a man who believed it was strength that befit a lord. Not only through his dialogue, whereupon he is defeated, and he then states that our strength in defeating him, befits our position as a lord, but also the description of the axe, which reads the following: in the days of the past, a crown was warranted with strength. And Hoaraloo's strength would be proven many times over. We hear of him via the Morn Greatsword, which reads, the storied sword of Castle Morn, a revenger's weapon. It is burdened with oceans of anger and regret. A lone surviving champion from a country now vanished was so determined to continue fighting that he claimed the swords of an entire clan of warriors. We can get a little clarification from the description of Oath of Vengeance, the weapon art for this weapon. It reads, swear an oath upon the greatsword to avenge the clan. To avenge the clan, meaning that this revenger has gathered the swords of his entire clan, who have evidently been wiped out, and he is the lone surviving member. The reason we know that this clan was wiped out by Hoaraloo is due to the fact the sword monument found outside Castle Morn makes it clear that Hoaraloo, or Godfrey, is the target of the revenger's ire. Given what we know of Hoaraloo's mantra, i.e. might equals right, I would speculate that it was just one of many clans obliterated by Hoaraloo in his quest to prove that he is the mightiest of all. The Crucible Knights. We of course know that the Crucible Knights were an elite cadre of warriors
the worst
specialized
part
in
about being
crucible
sick
incantations that served
is
Godfrey.
the throat pain.
For the Crucible Knight helm reads, Helm of the Crucible Knights, who served Godfrey the
I
first
can't
Elden
taste
Lord.
anything. I think
When they
I
were
got it like
specifically
COVID or
founded
something.
is unclear, but given their association with the Crucible, clearly it must
I
have
really
been
hope I
during
don't.
this era. Emergence of the Erdtree. Of course, at some
Okay,
stage,
I think all the base
Erdtree would
paint's
emerge
done.
from its transitional form, the Crucible, as we learn from varying sources such as the Godskin Noble said.
Right, gold
The
or
emergence of the tree changed the makeup of the world, and immediately its power was seen as a threat by many. This is something we learn via the protection of the Erdtree incantation, which reads, in the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erdtree,
in the
but through
beginning.
countless victories in war, it
I'll do the
became
gold
embodiment
first.
of order. Of course, it is obvious from Godfrey's armor set that the early age of the Erdtree was a brutal era marked by war, and therefore the Erdtree would have needed some defenders.
I didn't shake it up.
Marika as Empyrean. We know that Empyreans are those chosen to be potential gods, candidates for the next era, and we learn this via Rani's crucial dialogue.
I was once an Empyrean, of the demigods. Only I, Mikola, and Melania could claim that title. Each of us was chosen by our own two fingers, as a candidate to succeed Queen Marika, to become the new god of the coming age.
Therefore, it is interesting to know that Marika was once an Empyrean prior to being a god, which is told to us via the remembrance of the Black Blade, that refers to her specifically as an Empyrean. This means that Marika was elected from among her people, the Numen, as a candidate to lead the age of the Erdtree. I have made the Erdtree Wars its own distinct transitionary period, because clearly by the time of the War of the Giants, the Erdtree had emerged, and the Crucible was no more, and yet, according to the Sword Monument found atop the mountain tops of the Giants, the age of the Erdtree didn't truly begin until the Fire Giants fell, and so this tumultuous period is no longer the age of the Crucible, but not quite the age of the Erdtree. Thus, I've made it its own distinct, if transitionary, period. The founding of Leyndell. In the Leyndell map item description, Leyndell is described as the royal city of the Erdtree, and thus it makes sense that the city was founded early on in the age of the Erdtree, a holy city built around the most holy relic on this earth to those who believed in it. Whether it was founded before the War of the Giants or when it was concluded is of course speculation, but all massive cities throughout history begin small and take several generations to reach their zenith. They aren't just built in one day. Rome, of course, being a great example, famously not built in a day. So for me, it makes sense that as soon as the Erdtree emerged, those loyal to it would have most likely began flocking to it and building at its base to some degree. Godfrey, first Elden Lord. Evidently, one of Marika's first acts will have been to marry Hoarah, no doubt to bind his strength to her. With the prospect of becoming a lord, Godfrey vowed to be more lord-like and leave his bloodlust behind him, and to use his strength for more focused goals. And we learn of this transformation via the Godfrey icon, which reads the following. Godfrey was a ferocious warrior. When he vowed to become a lord, he took the beast regent Sarosh upon his back to suppress the ceaseless lust for battle that raged within. While Hoarah would no longer be a bloodthirsty destroyer, he evidently still had the might and will to persecute wars on behalf of Marika and the Erdtree. As we saw in the Protection of Erdtree incantation, everything was in opposition to the Erdtree at the beginning, and thus it makes sense that the early era of the Erdtree, when it first emerged, was one marked by war, and therefore the following wars make sense to have come early in Godfrey's reign. The War with the Stormlord. Of course, this conflict is one of Godfrey's greatest victories, and is referenced in his Elden Lord armor set, and a lot of what I know of this war comes from Eridan's excellent lore video on Limgrave, so definitely check that out. As Eridan points out, there is a painting in Stormveil that shows the castle was built after the Divine Tower, and this is the painting we referenced earlier in the video that shows Stormhill without the castle but with the Divine Tower. And to me this does track when we consider who the Stormlord really was, or what the Stormlord really was. And to me the most likely candidate is the Stormhawk King. The description of its ashes reads as follows. Ashes of a hawk, revered by all others as sovereign, back in the day when Stormveil's winds still raged like no other. This ancient monarch is proud, however, refusing to answer anyone's summons. So quite clearly this hawk was a monarch, and it makes sense that it would rule over a domain and not need a castle. Given all the associations with Storm at Stormhill, where Stormveil will be built, I do believe that the Stormlord was this hawk, and we get further evidence that this was the Stormlord via the Warhawk Ashes, which reads, Spirit of a Stormveil Warhawk, the talons of which have been sliced off so that razor-fine swords could be grafted in their place. With its lord vanquished and its wings wounded, the hawk perished as it solemnly gazed at its former home. To me it's clear that the lord of this hawk is the Stormhawk King, the Storm Lord, defeated by Hoarah so that he could claim its domain, Stormhill. The building of Stormveil. Eridan makes a compelling argument that Godfrey is the one to have built Stormveil Castle after the defeat of the Stormlord. Godfrey respects strength, and his respect for the Stormlord is shown in the hawk iconography displayed around the castle. More importantly, there is a custom-built throne room displaying Godfrey iconography and statues, again suggesting that this was the seat of his power that he built himself, the Siege of Morn. This of course leads on from the aforementioned Revenger we spoke of in the Hoarah chapter, where this story would come to its conclusion, and to consider the Siege of Morn itself, we need to consider the Castle Morn. The Weeping Peninsula appears to be an arrival point for many travelling to the lands between, as we can see boats littering the coast in this area. Much like King's Landing from George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones, Morn sits right on a coastal area, as if it were built where someone first landed. Given the name Morn, as in morning, and that the Sword of Morn is the storied weapon of this castle, I would suggest that the Revenger himself was responsible for the construction of the Castle Morn, and that they came here and built their base in order to challenge Godfrey, who may well have established himself here after the defeat of the Storm King and the building of Stormvale Castle. As we know from the sword monument found outside Castle Morn, we know how it ends, with Godfrey defeating one more opponent and claiming the spoils, Castle Morn and the Sword of Morn itself. It is interesting to note that both Stormvale Castle and Morn are still in the possession of the Golden lineage to this day. With these conquests, the Erdtree forces would control the entirety of the southern peninsula of the Lands Between, leaving their most deadly rivals to remain in the north. The War of the Giants. An event that needs little introduction to many, but a hugely dense and important event nonetheless. Upon the defeat of the Giants, the Age of the Erdtree would officially begin, making it a really important event. There are a number of different incidents that happened during this war that are important to note, such as the betrayal of the trolls.
We're gonna do
Giantkin would fight
two or
against
three of
the
these
fire
tonight.
giants, and thus explains their widespread presence in the Lands Between during the Erdtree era. We know that Godfrey
My God,
and
it's
Markov
already dark
personally
out?
fought in this war. Godfrey is mentioned to have. in
It's
his
5:25. That
and
is
Markov
not that
also
late.
gave a speech here.
Hark, brave warriors. Hark, my lord Godfrey. We commend your deeds. Guidance hath delivered ye through each ordeal to the place ye stand. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erdtree.
Marika is also reputed to have slain the fell god of the fire giants, according to the One-Eyed
Not-
Shield. The Zaymor joined
Regardless.
the Erdtree forces to finally destroy their ancient foes, and according to their armor set, they were heralded as heroes for their role within this war. The Confinement of Flame. We learn via the remembrance of the fire giant that upon realizing the flame of ruin could never be extinguished, even with the fell god and the giants put to sword, Marika confined the first fire giant to stand vigil next to the flame of ruin amongst the dead of his kin. It would also be around this time that the Order of the Fire Monks would be established to watch over and quarantine the flame. And with that, the Age of the Erdtree would officially begin. The Age of Plenty.
Okay.
The Age of the
Okay.
Erdtree began, and we learn of a period known as the Age of Plenty, which is marked by life energy falling as dew from the Erdtree itself. For example, we learn of it via the Blessed Dew Talisman, which reads as follows. It was once thought that the blessed sap of the Erdtree would drip from its boughs forever, but that age of plenty swiftly came to a close, and with time, the Erdtree became more an object of faith. We also know that Godfrey was very much still Elden Lord in this early era, because when this dew fell and hardened and became amber, these ambers were prized possessions of Godfrey's reign, as we learn via the Amber Medallions. Indeed, according to the Erdtree Favour Talisman, Queen Marika herself would bestow these gifts upon the faithful in person. In general, we can see the imagery associated with this era as one of positivity and bounty, showing amphoras and chalices full of dew. However, as already seen in the Blessed Dew Talisman, this era did not last long. And to me, the reason it didn't last long is because I see this as another transitional state between the Crucible and the Erdtree, where the newly emerged Erdtree was still bursting with the chaotic life energy of the Crucible. The Nox Heresy. We know via the Nox armor set that these people were
Alright,
banished
onto
from the
the
ground at some
lid
stage,
of the jar now.
invoking the ire of the Greater Will. And given the description and purpose of the Finger Slayer blade, my most likely assumption is that it was for killing A2 fingers. And we know that these so-called Nox were once the Numen that Marika herself was a member of, as the Black Knife assassin Set says that they are Numen,
This part
and
is
Rozier
stressful. I don't like this
links them
part.
to the Eternal City also. Numen and Nox are one and the same, and if you'd like to see a deeper video on those types of connections, I would refer you to my Eternal Cities lore video. In all honesty, it is hard to place where the Nox actually came into being when they did invoke the ire of the Greater Will and were banished. However, I am more inclined to place it here, further along the timeline, because of the sophisticated architectural style of the Eternal Cities that appear closer to Gothic architecture of our real world. The Golden Lineage. Of course, one of Godfrey's most enduring legacies is the Golden Lineage, the birth of his and Marika's children. I believe this must have come early on in the Erdtree era to give chance for this famous lineage to propagate before Godfrey was hounded from the lands between. We learn of the Golden Lineage via Godric's Great Rune, which reads as follows. The first of the demigods were the Elden Lord Godfrey and his offspring, the Golden Lineage. So this is the beginning of the idea of demigods. Potential first generation members of this lineage are of course Mohg and Morgott, the Omen twins. We know that these twins are of the Golden Lineage via Morgott's Great Rune. While they could of course be later descendants of Godfrey, the fact that Godfrey acknowledges that he has a relationship with Morgott in the scene where he lays Morgott to rest.
It's been a long while, Morgott.
Suggests indeed that Godfrey had actually met Morgott before, suggesting he is Godfrey's son rather than one of the later descendants of the Golden Lineage. Another presumed member of this first generation is Godwyn, given his prominence in early Erdtree history. Regardless, this is where the Golden Lineage and the demigods begin. The arenas. Godfrey was a champion who valued martial strength over everything else, and so sitting still, even in peacetime, was not an option, and so Godfrey finds the arenas, and we learn this via the ritual sword talisman, which reads, a talisman patterned after the swords used in ritual combat held to honour the Erdtree. The practice had died out by the age of King Consort Radagon, but remains of the arenas where ritual combat took place can still be found in every land. By implication, because this practice had died out under Radagon, it means that this practice was established under Godfrey, and this makes sense given of what we know of the man. Carrion royalty. As mentioned earlier, already by this time the people of Liurnia will have a rich history, and the Academy of Relicaria clearly precedes the Carrions, and I see the establishment of their royalty as a fairly recent event, given that Renala is both the founder and now current queen, meaning that not enough time has even passed for there to be even more than one monarch. The Godskin apostasy. The Godskin apostasy is a difficult one to place again,
It's not
but I
tomorrow.
think the main thing that we can say with some certainty
Dragon off my
is that it
chain.
must have taken place after Marika's ascension,
Actually, wait, I'll wait for
because
Dragon off my chain.
of the Black Flame
I
monks.
got Earth
We learned
Shade.
from their armor set that
Wait,
the Black Flame monks joined the forces of the God-slaying Black Flame.
wait, is that
meaning
loud?
They were active at the same time of the
Hold on.
Godskin apostasy. And given that the monks only existed after Marika had confined the flame, we must
Is
place
that
it
better?
after the beginning of the Erdtree age.
I didn't know my
The
mic
reason
was
for
that
my
loud.
focus on where
Sorry.
this important event sits is because of what happens at the conclusion of the war. It is very critical.
I assume it
Upon
was my mic
Malekith's
at least.
victory over the Gloam-Eyed Queen and her apostles, he seals Destined Death, as we learn via the Scouring Black Flame incantation, which reads, the Black Flame could once slay the gods, but when Malekith sealed Destined Death, the true power of the Black Flame was lost. This is the moment
Oh.
that death was confined, and thus is super important, because this is also the moment that the
I got a
Golden
headache
Order
from
was
too.
founded. For the mending
What?
rune of the Death Prince reads as follows. The Golden
I
Order
meant to
was
say that I have a
created by
headache too,
confining
twin.
Destined Death.
Not, I have a headache.
This is
I-
also
I-
my
holy
reasoning for
shit, I
placing
can't
it
speak.
at this stage, as we know from other sources that the Golden Order has to have existed within this
I
period
have
before
a
other certain
headache
events.
to
We learn
twin.
from Sorcerer
There we
Roger that the
go.
Liurnians were adopted into the Erdtree royal family, i.e. when Renala and Radigan got married, when the Golden Order was already around.
They were conceived at the Great Academy of Rea Lucaria, to the north of this castle. In the past, they obeyed laws which contravened the Golden Order, or so I'm told. Fascinating, isn't it? That the Golden Order was pliable enough to absorb practices that contradicted itself in the past. With the Order broken, twisted, and in need of repair, such adaptability is more important now than ever.
This of course means a number of things in regards to the timeline. The Golden Order was a thing before Radigan became Elden Lord, and thus the events that led to its formation,
I
the
should have known
removal
which
of
one.
death
Oh,
after the
okay.
Godskin
Fair one.
apostasy, must also have already happened by the time
Okay,
of the
I
two
increased the
Liurnian
volume. Is that better?
Wars, before Radigan married Renala, and before Godfrey was hounded from the lands between. So now that we have established that, what actually happened in this important event? Well, the Black Flame Ritual incantation tells us that the Glowmide Queen is an Empyrean, meaning that she was elected by the Greater Will at some stage as a nominee to replace Marika. She and her followers, the Godskin Apostles, wielding the power of the god-slaying Black Flame, an element that wielded death and death, as we learn via the numerous items like the Scouring Black Flame. We know via the Godskin Swaddling Cloth that the purpose of these beings was to bring death to the gods, and therefore we must assume that they were to bring
really?
death to Marika
I never
and her
knew
demigod
that.
family. Of course, the Godslayer Greatsword
I actually
tells us of
always
their
turned
defeat via
down
Malekith,
my stream
not only
purposely because I
bested
thought
the
that's
Glowmide
just
Queen,
how
but would also seal
you're
death
supposed to
and
do
death
it.
to sap the power of the god-slain Black Flame and death forever. The Golden Order. As already discussed, the Golden Order is the new order that reflects the new shape of the Elden Ring, one absent the Rune of Death. It is an order of death confined. It is also founded on another principle, as told to us by Brother Corrin, who states,
The Golden Order is founded on the principle that Marika is the one true god.
the Glowmide Queen was an Empyrean, and it's almost as if Marika was so rattled by what another Empyrean meant, it meant that she was disposable to the greater will. Thus she had to re-establish herself as the one true god. Not only that, but the forces that opposed her, the Godskin Apostles, had the power and the intention to slay her and her kin, bringing her mortality starkly into view, leading to the radical decision to completely confine death. One further thing to note is that the Golden Order as a general body of rule is not the same as Golden Order fundamentalism, which is a specific subset of scholars that we will discuss later. The Two Wars of Liurnia. This is of course one of the major conflicts in the early Erdtree era that we learn of via two sword monuments which read, The First Liurnian War. Radigan's glory burns red as his hair. And the Second Liurnian War. No victory for the Golden.
Alright, I really just heard dry brushing.
No prize but atonement. The birth of a vow.
I think it's nice.
It makes sense that these two factions would come into conflict, as by now they would be the two remaining major factions in the lands between, and given how aggressively the Erdtree forces had been in eliminating all opposition, it was inevitable that they would come for the Carians and their land. This is one of the most important events in the lands between history, and thus there are several points of interest to consider. Firstly, Godfrey is still Elden Lord at this stage, because he has not been hounded from the lands between until Radigan has married Renala, as we learn via Muriel. Given what we know of Godfrey's penchant for war, it's interesting that we get very little mention of him during this conflict. Instead, the focus goes elsewhere, as this is the first emergence of a legendary hero. This is the emergence of Radigan, who joins the champion's ranks, seemingly out of nowhere, and yet his heroism during these wars is repeatedly hammered home. This isn't a lore video on Radigan, but if you would like to see my take on Radigan, then please watch my video on Marika. But in
Let's touch
essence,
the other ones.
I'm in the
on
camp that believes that Radigan has always been a part of Marika since she obtained godhood, so that together they are the perfect alchemical rebus, a living representation of the ideals of regression and convergence. Regardless of Radigan's power, this would be a hard-fought conflict for both sides. This would be in no small part thanks to the legendary Carrion Knights, whose legendary exploits we can learn via their sword description, which reads, "These knights' swords could serve as catalysts, letting them wield sorcerous battle skills. Despite numbering fewer than 20, this power made them a match for even the champions of gold in battle. Despite the low numbers of the Carrion Knights, their power and skill made them a match for the best of the Erdtree forces, and thus two wars would be fought to a standstill between both the Erdtree and the Carrion forces. But then something crucial would happen at the end of the Second War. Peace. Peace bound by marriage, between Radigan, Champion of Gold, and Renala, Queen of the Moon, a ceremony that would take place in the Church of Vows, in sight of both Moon and Tree. The Carrion royal line and Erdtree royalty were joined, a remarkable display of integration shown by the Erdtree forces that has never again been seen. Radigan and Renala. Many important events would happen during the course of Renala and Radigan's marriage. Firstly, the birth of three important future demigods, Radan, Rykard, and Rani. The other important factor is what Radigan learned during his time married to Renala, as we learn via the Radigan Talisman, which reads as follows. As the husband of Renala of Caria, the red-haired Radigan studied sorcery, and as the husband of Queen Marika, he studied incantations. Thus did the hero aspire to be complete. The idea of combining intelligence-based sorceries and faith-based studies is a core facet of the Golden Order fundamentalism that Radigan would later help develop. War of the Ancient Dragons. The War of the Ancient Dragons is another difficult one to place precisely. All we can say for certain is that it took place after Godwyn's death, given his obvious involvement in the war, but before the Night of the Black Knives for obvious reasons. I am inclined to place it before Godfrey was hounded from the lands between, as I see Godfrey's era as the era of war, but beyond that I have no real proof, and it could happen anywhere in Godwyn's lifetime. Regardless, the main takeaways from this era are Gransacks being felled in the centre of Leyndell, and the establishment of the Draconic Tree Sentinels and a dragon cult within Leyndell, and of course, the legendary friendship between Godwyn and Fortisax. Godfrey and the Tarnished. Godfrey's armour tells us that after he defeated all his worthy enemies, the hue from his eyes faded, and it is clear that this is when Godfrey and his warriors became tarnished. The hue from his eyes has a double meaning. Not only does it mean he has lost all purpose, but it also means literally he has lost grace. Tarnishing is the loss of grace. The sword monument near Caelid reads, Lord Godfrey, at last, at the end of his campaign, his golden armies unvanquished and unbowed, yet finds grace lost, tattered, and faded.
Yeah, I got distracted.
It in fact appears that the loss of grace is not accidental, but a purposeful stripping by Marika, as she once said the following.
My lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die. Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed, return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring, grow strong in the face of death. Warriors of my lord, Lord Godfrey.
Godfrey was the lord of the battlefield, and in the lands between, he no longer had a purpose. Yet Marika did have a purpose for him and his warriors, and so she made them tarnished, to go and fight out with the lands between, and return when they were needed. We know that the tarnished, those without grace, are seen as lesser by those with grace, and we can see this in the way that Kenneth Haight reacts to us upon first meeting.
Ah, You've come to lend me your aid, have you? Well, that's very kind, but, no. No, the help is very much appreciated, even from a Tarnished.
And the way in which Muriel describes Godfrey being hounded from the lands between, suggesting that he and his Tarnished were chased by those with grace out of the lands between because they were seen as lesser and unwelcome. The Long March. After being driven from the lands between, Godfrey would lead his new Tarnished on something known as the Long March, which we learn of via his axe. While it appears that this was a sort of crusade, it apparently did have a purpose, as we learn it came to an end via Horalu's remembrance, which reads, "When Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was robbed of his grace, becoming tarnished, he took with him his kinfolk and left the lands between. After the long march of the tarnished came to an end, Godfrey divested himself of kingship, becoming a simple warrior once more. Thus he became Horalu again, and after a long time of battling wars that broke his axe, he and his people would finally settle out with the lands between. Horalu specifically became a chieftain of the Badlands, but the Tarnish would become widespread throughout different nations." The Ascension of Radagon. A well-known and important event as told to us by Muriel. Radagon abandons Rennala after Godfrey has been chased from the lands between, and returns to the capital to marry Marika. This is baffling to many, including Muriel, given Radagon's relatively low standing, he is just a mere champion, and his abrupt abandonment of his wife. Upon his marriage to Marika, he becomes the second Elden Lord, and his children, Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni, become Marika's stepchildren. The Divine Twins. At some point after Radagon's
I've
marriage
always
to
wondered
Rennala,
how that worked.
the
with
twins
them.
Malenia and Mikla would be born, special but cursed, due to the nature of their birth from the one-bodied god, i.e., being born from Marika and Radagon while they are one body. Malenia is afflicted with the Scarlet Rot, but according to Gowry is elected as an Empyrean to replace Marika as the Goddess of Rot, leading the new Order of Rot. And if you want to see a video discussing these ideas, then I'd refer you to my Outer God lore video. Mikla is also chosen as Empyrean, no doubt on account of his wisdom, and together with Ranni, we now have 3 potential successors to the next age. Development of fundamentalism. We learn via Discus of Light, Triple Rings of Light, and Radagon's Rings of Light that father and son work together to help develop the ideals and incantations of Golden Order fundamentalism, and as such, I attribute the birth of this theology to be around this time. The motivations for father and son seem to be very different. Radagon is extremely loyal to the ideals of the Golden Order, whereas Mikla is seemingly seeking a cure for his sister to rid her of the Scarlet Rot. Mikla the Unalloyed. Radagon's Rings of Light also tell us that Mikla became disillusioned with the Golden Order, and it must have been soon after that he would choose his own path as the Unalloyed. In time, he would take the sapling of a minor Erd tree, watering it with his own blood in an attempt to create his own Erd tree. This, of course, would become the Halig tree, the Holy Tree. Rhea Lucaria rebels. We learn from the remembrance of Rennala that after Radagon left, she was broken, and the Rhea Lucarians took this opportunity to imprison Rennala within the Grand Library, something we learn via Muriel. And in general, it looks like Rhea Lucaria and the Cuckoos rebel from the Carians, as we learn via a sword monument which details a battle between the Cuckoos and Caria Manor. It reads, "The resting place of the contemptible Cuckoos lost in the siege of Caria Manor." And indeed, some of the remnants of Cuckoo forces are now puppets that patrol the manor they once laid siege to. Ranni conspires with the Nox. We know the assassins of the Knight of the Black Knives are women from the Eternal Cities, most likely the nimble swordstresses, and at some stage, Ranni must have put her plans into motion some time before the assassination took place and reached out to the Eternal Cities. This is stage 1 in her plan to cut ties with her 2 fingers, and it may well be that the events of the Cuckoo Rebellion and the downfall of her family's prominence spurred her into action, though as we will soon see, her plans would be halted by her brother, the Star Scourge. Knight of the Black Knives. The Rune of Death is stolen from Malekith, and we know from Malekith's Black Blade that he only had the rune hidden in his own flesh after this night, meaning it was still located in his sword at this time, and thus probably quite easy to steal. Ranni's co-conspirators managed to catch Godwyn off guard due to their cloaks that fool the eye, and carve the half-wound of the centipede into his flesh, using knives imbued with death, but at the same time, Ranni has the other half
I'm
carved
getting
into
it,
her
okay.
own flesh to achieve her
Bam.
true goal, the death of her flesh, without the consequence of losing her soul. And thus Godwyn is basically used as a totem to take the soul death, so Ranni can escape with her soul out of her Empyrean flesh. Burial of Godwyn. Godwyn's living and death corpse is buried at the base of the Great Tree roots, and from his body grows the Death Root, which spreads through the lands between via these massive roots. This leads to the rise of those who live in death, living reminders of the Golden Order's flaws, and thus it becomes the target for Golden Order fundamentalist hunters. Fortisax mourns the death of his friend and enters his dream in an attempt to fight off the spread of death from within Godwyn's own mind. Radahn's studies and the Star Scourge conflict. I'm placing Ranni's plot prior to Radahn's study of gravity magic at Celia, because while he does use it to save Celia in the Star Scourge conflict, I believe his motivations have to be the arresting of fate and stopping Ranni's plans. We know that Radahn is more Golden Order sympathetic than his siblings. His golden armor set shows us the figures that he admires: his father in the red plume, and Godfrey, Lord of the Battlefield, two massive figures within the Golden Pantheon. We also know that Radahn stopping the stars directly affects Ranni's schemes, as Selin says the following.
The stars alter the fate of the Karian royal family, and the fate of your mistress Ranni. But long ago, General Radahn challenged the swirling constellations, and in a crushing victory arrested their cycles. Now he is the force that repulses the stars. If General Radahn were to die, the stars would resume their movement, and so too would Ranni's destiny.
And in consort, if we read the telescope item description, it reads, during the age of the Erd Tree, Karian astrology withered on the vine. The fate once writ in the night skies has been fettered by the Golden Order. So it is Radahn that fetters fate, and he's actually referred to here by the telescope as the Golden Order. As we are told by a sword monument in Caelid, Radahn's victory over the stars is called the Star Scourge conflict. Celia is kept safe from some calamity, and he earns his famous moniker, the Star Scourge. Marika shatters the Elden Ring. For whatever reason you believe, the death of Godwyn is the catalyst for Marika finally shattering the Elden Ring. The intro cinematic shows the struggle between Marika and Radagon, and Marika's hammer item description tells us what's happening here. Marika is using the hammer to shatter the Elden Ring, while Radagon is trying to repair it, both sides vying for control of the same body. Clearly the two halves now have radically different beliefs and views, which leads to this struggle over the hammer.
O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
Yet ultimately we know who's victorious and what happens. The Elden Ring is shattered, and the world is never the same again. And now I'll leave you in the capable hands of my good friend Lore Hunter, who will take us through the next era, the Shattering.
Why, hello there.
Alright, now to the dark
Now we find
brown
ourselves at the
arms
Shattering War, the
of Wildwood.
conflict that ultimately plunges the lands between into a cold war that lasts for 5,000 years, according to author George R.R. Martin. After Marika shattered the Elden Ring, the opening cinematic tells us that her demigod children inherited great runes, shards of the Elden Ring, as well as an empty throne. An Altus Plateau sword monument explains that a sovereign alliance formed between the demigods, but that the peace was short-lived. Diverging ideologies, distrust, and ambition rotted this sovereign alliance. In the first defense of Leyndell, the Erd Tree capital was besieged by Godefroy the Grafted, descendant of Godfrey the First Elden Lord. Leyndell repelled the assault, and the Dragon Knight Kristoff heroically captured Godefroy, a feat that earned him Erd Tree burial according to the knight's ashes. We learn from Godric's soldier ashes and dialogue from Kenneth Height that Godefroy's kin, Godric the Grafted, fled Leyndell and was pursued all the way to Stormvale by Starscourge Radahn. Around this time, Morgoth the Grace-Given, veiled monarch and lord of Leyndell, took on the persona of Margit the Fell Omen. The Knights Cavalry set tells us that under the command of the Fell Omen, they were deliverers of death for great warriors, knights, and champions. The war progressed, and the perfumers of the capital turned their healing arts into arts of war. The uplifting aromatic states they commanded troops by using their arts to remove their fear of death and to continue fighting. As the war drew on, they wielded fire, once prohibited for use by those who serve the Erd Tree, to burn their enemies according to the spark aromatic. Now we arrive at the second defense of Leyndell, where the Fell Omen stacked high the corpses of heroes and kept the inner wall of Leyndell secure, repelling the attack. Morgoth would continue to don the mantle of the Fell Omen through the arrival of the Tarnished, extinguishing the ambitions of any who dared seek out the Erd Tree to be Elden Lord. Gideon Ofnir the All-Knowing explains that around this time the most appalling battle occurred along the slopes of Mount Gelmir. Leyndell clashed with the forces of Praetor Rykard, who in the depths of his blasphemy had declared war on the gods and burned a minor Erd Tree. This horrific battle took its toll on Leyndell's army, diminishing its power. Rykard's horrific blasphemy disillusioned and dissipated his remaining forces, as Rykard was fully consumed by his plot to devour the gods. During this time, sword monuments in Liurnia and Limgrave state that Malenia the Severed and her Cleanrot Knights marched southward. The Academy of Raya Lucaria had its gates shut and declared it would not interfere in the Shattering, according to Tops the Bluntstone. Malenia defeated Godric the Grafted in battle, forcing him to beg for mercy after insulting her. Godric would remain within Stormvale following this defeat, continuing to graft himself so that he might rise to the strength of his forefathers of the Golden Lineage. Now we arrive at the climax of the Shattering War. Malenia, Blade of Mikola, and General Radahn were the two mightiest demigods remaining according to the story trailer. As illustrated in the prologue, Malenia and her Cleanrot Knights met Radahn and his Redmanes in the Caelid Wilds. The armies clashed and these two demigods locked horns in combat. Radahn and Malenia wounded each other and fought to a standstill. It was then that Malenia, Blade of Mikola, gave into the rot within her and unleashed the Scarlet Aeonia, an act that decimated the region of Caelid and put both herself and Radahn out of commission. Radahn, his mind rotted, would endlessly stalk the battlefield awaiting an honorable death, according to witch hunter Jaren. Malenia's knight Finley would take the slumbering and consumed Malenia back to the Halig Tree, where she would remain, awaiting the return of her brother. Mikola, however, had been ripped out of the Halig Tree and kidnapped by Morgoth's twin brother Mohg, while Malenia campaigned, as illustrated in the prologue. Mikola's slumbering corpse would remain in Mohg's clutches as he attempted to establish the Mohgwyn dynasty with Mikola as his god. And so the Shattering War came to a standstill, with every side broken and no lord to take the throne. With no lord to succeed Marika, the Greater Will abandoned the broken lands between. But that was not the end.
And now we enter the era that we're currently in, what I will call the Age of the Tarnished. The Tarnish return.
Ah, great runes are the stuff of demigods, the children of the goddess, Queen Marika, she who is vessel of the Elden Ring. Tainted by the strength of their runes, her children ward
but none could become Elden Lord. And so grace was extended to your kind, the Tarnished.
Anea tells us everything we really need to know about why the Tarnished were returned to the Lands Between. The demigods had failed to take the throne and restore order, and so this disgraced warrior class that had been left in the pocket by Marika and the Greater Will was seen as the last option to restore order. We know that even before the player character enters the fray, the Tarnished have already been here for a long time and have a fairly storied history. We know that Vargram was one of the first Tarnished to visit Round Table Hold. We know the likes of Vike and Bernal had their time in the sun, both being serious contenders for lordship. And this is the world that we step into, a world with a rich and bloody history, from the ancient dragons to the Battle of Aeonia. What a rich world that both George R.R. Martin and Miyazaki have
Already?
crafted here.
That's only 1 hour and 20 minutes. Of 14 hours. Oh my god.
In fantasy, there is no greater symbol of power than that of the dragon, and Elden Ring is no different. The ancient dragons are primal yet sophisticated, brutal yet elegant. They were the first custodians of the Elden Ring and bearers of the Greater Will's gold, immortal beings of tremendous power who have carved out an indelible legacy on the Lands Between. The Greater Will did not always have Marika as its chosen vessel, nor did the Erdtree even exist. Before then, the Greater Will chose to exert its will through a more bestial, primal power, the dragon Placidusax being chosen as Elden Lord long before Godfrey even swung an axe. Under the rule of these immortal custodians, civilization took root, with feral beastmen being granted intelligence and producing craft and architecture humans of the modern era could only dream of. Yet no age lasts forever, and the rule of the dragons faltered, eventually being replaced with the Erdtree, and their rule would collapse and their god would flee. Yet the dragons did not go quietly into the night, and eventually would come into conflict with the lands of the Erdtree, and would forever leave their mark on the Lands Between as a result. Reminders of their majesty, might, and influence are everywhere in the Lands Between, even in Leyndell itself, with many seeking to grasp even a fraction of the power that these immortal beings once possessed. So join me this week as we bask in the magnificence of the ancient dragon civilization. When I now think of the timeline in Elden Ring, I begin to see distinct epochs that in some way mirror the evolution of life and the growth of civilization on our own planet. While I see there to be different periods within these ages, the three main stages of life and civilization that I see in the Lands Between are the Primordial Era, the Age of the Dragons, and the Age of the Erdtree. The dragons are so intensely tied with the early history of Elden Ring's world, as well as the gestation of life itself, representing one of the first forms of dominant life, and most likely the first civilization. In our own planet, IRL, the dominant theory by scientists is that we evolved from a primordial soup, essentially a hot broth of molecules that would go on to be the building blocks of life. However, in Elden Ring, the development of life on this earth seems to have started with something called the One Great, and this is something we learn of via Hyetta, an adherent of the Frenzied Flame. She says the following:
The words of the three fingers, as your maiden, allow me to divine them. All that there is came from the One Great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the Greater Will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake.
So life on this planet once took a singular form, this One Great. There is no disparity or division of life. That is until, according to Hyetta, the Greater Will decided to make disparate life, with this one source of life fracturing into a multitude of different life forms that would form the basis for the world that we know today. I personally find it very interesting that the Greater Will is powerful enough to have started this change, and it's even more interesting when we consider that the Elden Beast was sent to the Earth via the Greater Will. We learn this via the Elden Star's incantation, which reads as follows. It is said that long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. I find this interesting because I believe it was this act that began the Greater Will's influence over the mortal plane, for we learn from the remembrance of the Elden Beast that this is the living incarnation of Order, the Greater Will's Order. One of the reasons that I believe that this is how the Greater Will fractured the One Great and begat diverse life is because the Greater Will never directly acts on the mortal world. It acts through vassals, such as Marika, its vassal god, or the Elden Beast, which is referred to as its vassal beast in the Elden Remembrance, and so it makes sense that this vassal beast was sent to the earth to enact its master's vision. And credit to Sin and Sophie at the Sinclair Lore podcast in their Marika and Death video, where they made this nuance pretty clear, and I'll link that below. The Greater Will's main objective in any era is to impose its order upon the world. The Elden Ring is clearly the main instrument through which the Greater Will achieves this, a power to command the stars and the world around it. And I now believe that the Greater Will's decision to divide the One Great and the arrival of the Elden Beast are two coinciding facts. I speculate that it could have been this arrival of the Beast, of the Elden Ring, that influenced the division of the One Great in the first place, influencing the evolution of new life from the resulting fracturing of that life governed by the Elden Ring. Evidently, one of the first forms of life that would evolve out of this would be the dragon, and as we will see later, these are almost the perfect vehicles for the Greater Will's vision, almost as if they are custom built for that very role, perhaps directly influenced by the Elden Ring and the Greater Will itself. Obviously, the evolution of life on a planet is something that takes millions of years, and while I am simply stating that there was once the One Great, there was then a division of life, and then there was the dragons is quite arbitrary, we can't really know the exact timescales, but suffice it to say there was probably a long period of time between life first fracturing from the One Great and the dragons taking command of the world. Indeed, when we look at a later chapter and analyse Tarnished Archaeologist's work, we will see that the dragon civilization takes up the prehistoric era, tracing from the Stone Age right up to possibly the Iron Age. And allegorical to our own world, the difference between the Stone Age and the first emergence of life is of course millions of years, so that should give you some understanding of the timescales we're talking about. But now let us move to the Age of the Dragons. As I have just mentioned, we consider it the prehistoric era, not only because of some of the evidence we will look at later, but because it is directly referenced as such in-game. For example, any of the dragon talismans that we find read as follows. The ancient dragons who ruled in the prehistoric era before the Erdtree would protect their lord as a wall of living rock. So there we have it is dated as prehistoric, and again we will further dive into this in a later chapter, but for now suffice it to say the Erdtree was only a twinkle in the Greater Will's eye, really showing how long the Greater Will
No, I'm going to
has
touch
ruled
up
over
these
life.
spots.
And indeed, I argue that a Greater Will is actually responsible for all life on this earth, an idea that I will discuss in the next chapter. But for now I want to discuss the general purpose of the ancient dragons and their relationship with the Elden Ring. The ancient dragons were the first instruments of the Greater Will, and while this will seem obvious to many people, I do need to cover it because I have actually seen people disagree in this fact and believe that the ancient dragons served some outer god. So I do think it's relevant at the onset of this video to discuss the dragon's relationship to the Greater Will and their relationship to the Elden Ring. My main source for the dragons being tied to the Greater Will of course comes from Placidusax's Remembrance, which reads as follows. The Dragon Lord whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the Erdtree. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return. Placidusax was an Elden Lord, and that is a position that would later be held by Godfrey and Radigan, and then potentially ourselves. Elden Lord isn't just a generic title for any lord of any outer god. It is a specific title for a lord associated with the Greater Will, associated with the Elden Ring. I believe a lot of the confusion surrounding this comes from the part that says once his god was fled, which people assume to be an outer god. But remember, Marika is a god, and Godfrey was her Elden Lord, and this is the same relationship that's being described here. It isn't an outer god, it is a vessel god of the Greater Will. And besides that, the association with the Elden Ring for the dragons should be clear by the presence of a pretty prominent Elden Ring engraving in the centre of Farum Azula, albeit an Elden Ring that has a different makeup, an Elden Ring for a more primeval and primordial era. And if you'd like to watch a video assessing this different Elden Ring and the differences between the modern Elden Ring, I'd highly recommend Radatasker's video called The Greater Will Doesn't Care About the Golden Order, and I will link that below if you want to see the Elden Ring dissected in a more dedicated lore video. But this Elden Ring is representative of the dragon's rule. It even looks more primeval and primordial, far more wild in its appearance than the refined Elden Ring of the Golden Order. And this is fitting of both eras. The dragon's era was one of chaotic primeval life, whereas the Golden Order is a more sophisticated, refined era of convergence and regression. However, these are both sanctioned eras of the Greater Will. They are both orders of the Greater Will. And as Radataskor so aptly put it, the Greater Will does not care what form order takes, only the order is imposed. Whether life be represented by the Greater Will in the form of the Crucible or in the form of the Erdtree. And with that said, let us talk about the Crucible and its relationship with the dragons. Thanks to the Godskin Noble set, we know that the Crucible is the primordial form of the Erdtree, meaning the Crucible grew into what we know as now the Erdtree. They are one and the same, just different stages of its life cycle. They are both a manifestation of the Elden Ring. They are both nexuses of life energy, but where the Erdtree represents ordered, coalesced, converged life, the Crucible represents a chaotic churn of primeval life energy. If there are those who are wanting to learn more about my take on the Erdtree and what it represents, I would refer you to my Marika and Erdtree lore video, where I go into that subject in extensive detail. But returning to the Crucible, it is described not only as the primordial form of the Erdtree, but the primordial source of life. This is something told to us by the Crucible scale and not talisman, both of which read, a vestige of the Crucible of primordial life, born partially of devolution. It was considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization has advanced. The Crucible of primordial life suggests that not only was the Crucible a source of life, but it may have been the source of all life. This idea of the Crucible being tied to all life itself is backed up by the description of Siluria's spear, that describes the Crucible as being close in nature to life itself. Here is a narrative that I'm going to suggest. The Elden Beast was sent to the lands between and became the Elden Ring, which began to exert its power upon the land, and it was this that fractured the One Great and begat the churn of life known as the Crucible, and from this all life would come. While this is of course speculation, it does make sense to me, and it pieces together how the Greater Will created diverse life in the first place. These types of thoughts have also led me to consider the nature of the Greater Will itself. Often I see the Greater Will described as an outer god, but it is never directly referred to as an outer god. What other outer god would actually have the power to do what the Greater Will has done? Divide the One Great and create diverse life? What if the Greater Will is more like Iluvatar from Lord of the Rings, the supreme creator deity, and the outer gods are no more to the Greater Will than a vassal god like Marika? This is an idea that I am slowly coming around to, and I think I will cover it in my next lore theory video. Anyway, the foundational point that I'm getting at here is that I believe the Crucible had to have existed at the time of the dragons if it was the source of all life on this planet. And again, I am going over this because some people disagree on the fact that the Crucible existed at the time of the dragons. There are also other artistic hints that the dragons existed at the time of the Crucible. We learn via Siluria's spear that this spear is modelled after the Crucible, therefore a wild-looking tree. Quailag, in one of her lore videos, brought attention to some of the reliefs that can be found in Fire Missoula that appear to show two beings. To me, either beastmen, misbegotten, or some form of dragonkin, flanking a tree-like formation. Given we know the Crucible's importance and its appearance, it would appear likely then that these reliefs depict the Crucible, lending credence to the fact that the Crucible was indeed around during the Age of the Dragon for these reliefs to have been carved in the first place. This may also explain the depiction of the Elden Ring inscription we talked about earlier. Is it possible that the branches overlaid the Elden Ring are in fact a rune embedded into the Elden Ring that was tied to the Crucible? Or perhaps it is merely an artistic overlay meant to depict the importance of the Crucible at this stage. Regardless of the artistic facets, the very abilities of the dragons themselves seem to belie a connection to the Crucible, one made apparent to me thanks to Last Protagonist's excellent video on the Great Tree, Crucible and Golden Order, which I highly recommend and will link below. In that video, Last Protagonist quite correctly points out that the lightning of the ancient dragons is red, and the gravel stone seal's description implies that this is a red gold, for it reads as follows. The worship of the ancient dragons does not conflict with belief in the Erdtree. After all, this seal and lightning itself are both imbued with gold. So if the lightning is imbued with gold, it must be imbued with red gold. And this is important because red gold is closely associated with the age of the Crucible. We learn this from the weapon of Crucible Knight Ordovis, for his greatsword reads as follows. This sword is imbued with an ancient holy essence. Its red tint exemplifies the nature of primordial gold, said to be close in nature to life itself, and is further backed up by the gilded greatshield, which reads, the red tinge in the gold coat mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erdtree. So while it is clear the dragons are tied to the Greater Well, gold, and the Elden Ring, I think there is enough evidence to suggest that they were tied directly to the power of the Crucible, and they are excellent avatars for its power in this more primitive, bestial era of chaotic life. With that said, let us now look at the form of these dragons, these avatars of primal life, and the power that they were able to muster. We get a great overview of the two main symbols of the ancient dragon's power, lightning and stone, via the lightning strike item description, which reads, Ancestors of the modern dragons, the ancient dragons had scales of gravel stone and wielded lightning as their weapon. So clearly, the most important aspect of their form is their gravel stone scales, for it is these scales that give them their immortality, and this is something we learn via the dragon scale blade, which reads as follows. A weapon made by sharpening a gravel stone scale, thought to be the source of ancient dragon immortality. What is interesting is that the immortality granted by the scales may be a result of the stone's manipulation of time, for the ancient dragon smithing stone reads as follows. Smithing stone made by polishing a golden gravel stone, a scale of the ancient dragon lord, and hidden treasure of Farum Azula. The ancient dragon lord's seat is said to lie beyond time. This stone lightly twists time, allowing the creation of a weapon capable of slaying a god.
I'm at some
As we will
M&Ms.
see later in the video, this power over time
I luckily
is
love
tied
M&Ms.
to how Farum Azula exists beyond time.
Favorite candy
While
girl.
this item description only refers to the Dragon Lord, i.e. Placidusax, I believe that we can extend it to all Gravelstone, as being able to slightly twist time can explain their immortality. Because what if the stones mean that the dragons do not really exist in time or the timeline as we do, as mortals do? What if, like Farum Azula, they exist beyond time, and thus never actually age, in effect making them immortal? This is certainly one of the main sources of their power, and is what sets them apart from their
Don't be
lesser,
jealous.
modern,
Here.
mortal kin.
Come on.
And indeed, we see that the gravel
Here.
stone covering the
Catch.
entire body actually gives them protective strength. And it
I don't
becomes
know if you got
legendary
that.
as protection, because in time,
I hope you got.
dragons would come to
I
represent
hope you got that.
protection. And this is something we learn from any of the dragon talismans, which read, the ancient dragons who ruled in the prehistoric era before the Erdtree would protect their lord as a wall of living rock. And so it is that the shape of the dragon has become symbolic.
Okay,
of
I
all
actually have to
manner
pick
of
that up. Hold on,
protection.
a second.
This
It's gonna track the
association
ants one
with
second.
physical defense, of course, makes
Um.
sense, as their scales are literal stone, and despite being part of a living being, it still behaves like regular stone, something that we can see if you look carefully at the remains of Grandsax, who now has moss growing on him. Unlike a regular soft tissue body that would decompose after time and certainly not have moss
Even though
on
I'm
it,
wearing a
this
mask, are you
stone
able to hear
corpse
me well?
remains, just as any other stone construction would, just as the walls that surround it. The gravel stone is a remarkable gift indeed, for not only does it provide them with immortality, but also great protection. And I believe we can see how central this stone is to their own identity by analysing their names. In an interesting post on the etymology subreddit, a commenter called Snewpeppers9223 broke down some of the words found in Elden Ring, including the names of the ancient dragons. The four named ancient dragons we come across are Fortisax, Landsax, Placidusax, and Grandsax. In this post, Snewpepper breaks down the Latin beginning participle of each name.
Just about.
Fortisax is the strong, Grandsax
I
is the
need
large,
Baneblade Brown
Landsax the
and
bearer of the lance,
I can find
and
it Gorthor
Placidusax
Brown.
the calm or peaceful. I think this is fitting for each of them. Fortisax is mighty, Landsax does bear her lance or glaive, Grandsax is undeniably
Wait.
massive, and Placidusax is becalmed when we first meet him, or perhaps it is an indicator of his
Where
style
is
of rule
that? It's
of
gone.
his Elden Lord. However, it is the second
Wait, where's my
participle
Bane?
that is of interest to me. Sax,
Okay, wait. I got
Snewpepper
Baneblade Brown here.
stone, and I do think this is a
I
correct
don't know where
interpretation, because the description of
Gorthor Brown
Fortisax's
is.
lightning spear does appear to transliterate his name in the same way.
Hold on one second. I gotta
Fortisax,
look for this
mightiest
paint cuddler.
boulder stone. Another interesting facet of their physiology is, of course, their golden wings, a subject touched upon by Zuli in her A Horrible Nightmare video. And as always, I will link that below if you're interested. However, in the course of that video, Zuli essentially suggests that it is the fleshy skin of the dragons that is made of gold,
Okay, I'm stupid.
pointing out that
It's
it
right here.
appears on the wing membrane and
I got
under
it.
the wounded portions
Okay,
of
okay.
Placidusax's skin. This makes me wonder about the very nature of the dragons themselves. Clearly they are exceptional beings, immortal, powerful, intelligent, and even seem to have some latent abilities related to time. And now we see that gold, literally the symbol of the greater will, is part of their very flesh. These truly are the greatest and most perfect servants of the greater will, as though they were custom designed by the greater will or formed directly by the Elden Ring. With the basic forms of these majestic
Did
dragons
this one
covered,
dry out?
I do want to touch
No.
upon their Elden Lord and God.
I was scared these base
Placidusax
paints
is
dry
obviously
out.
a being far greater than the rest of his kin, far different. He is the Elden Lord, and seems so connected to the power of the greater will in the Elden Ring that he breathes literal golden fire, as we learn via the
Sorry, I was gonna say
Placidusax's
something,
rune
But
item
my
description.
throat doesn't want me to say
Indeed,
anything.
There is
Okay,
another beast that also breathes golden fire. A beast
I forgot
so
what this is.
tightly tied
Oh wait, no,
to
that's
the
right.
Elden Ring and the greater will that it
Yeah,
should
I
highlight
lose
just how
these.
important
I'm
it
using the
is
wrong paintbrush.
that Placidusax breathes
I lose
this
these little
golden
paints all the
flame.
time. I
It
keep them
shows how
over
close
my
he is in
table,
nature
or over
to
my
the
table
Elden
over
Ring
there.
and the
Can't really
greater
see it because
will.
the camera's
Alongside
pointed
his
down, but
ability to breathe golden fire, he also has 4
Back
heads,
table.
or maybe 5, that sets him far apart from the rest of his kin. While he only has 2 now, we know he had more thanks to the depiction on the Old Lord's talisman, as well as the neck wounds that we can see on his body. 4 or 5 doesn't really matter because it is clear which myth that Placidusax is evoking, and by examining this myth, we may in turn learn more about this dragon lord and their enigmatic god. I of course believe that Placidusax is drawing on the myth of Tiamat, the Mesopotamian god of the sea, and, to quote Wikipedia, the symbol of primordial creation. Sounds fitting, does it not? We have at length discussed how the dragons are the very symbol of chaotic primordial life, the symbols of the Crucible era.
On a
And so
lighter
is it not
orange
fitting that their Elden Lord
glare.
is drawn from a real-world myth that also represents this idea? To explain why Placidusax draws upon Tiamat, we need to go down a little bit of a weird rabbit hole, because as you can see from these more ancient depictions of Tiamat, the imagery doesn't quite match up, as Tiamat appears more like a serpentine manticore type character. Yet despite the original source, most people in popular culture associate Tiamat with a multi-headed dragon, and this is thanks to Dungeons and Dragons in the 1970s, when Tiamat was reintroduced as the multi-headed dragon we all know and love. Yet despite that, linking Placidusax to Tiamat feels right for a number of reasons. Tiamat is an important figure in Mesopotamian mythology. Firstly, she creates a number of beasts, including dragons. And a note that in D&D mythology, she is directly the mother of dragons. And this fits in with Placidusax being the lord of the dragons in Elden Ring, perhaps even suggesting he was the first of their kind, and actually birthed them into the world through the coupling with the enigmatic god he is consort to. Placidusax is possibly the father of all dragons, the greatest of their kind. He also appears to be the first to have commanded the lightning. Stretching the semantics of the wording found in the Dragon King's Cragblade, it refers to his lightning as primeval lightning, reinforcing the idea that he was the first of his kind to master the lightning.
Like the what?
And indeed, his mastery over the
That
lightning
goes in
is
what?
far beyond anything else we see with the
I'll
other
be
dragons.
fully honest, I'm so
While
lost.
they are able to fashion it into spears, he is able to divide it into claws, even becoming a storm of lightning himself. The way in which Placidusax fights, the way in which he wields the lightning, and the way he can fade into a storm is truly remarkable, and gives the impression that he himself is a force of nature. His lightning manipulation exceeds the abilities of any other dragon by a mile, and makes it look pretty pathetic in comparison to his powers. He is a manifestation of power and life, and this is reflected in his mastery over the storm and primeval lightning, and in his unmatched power. With the myth of Tiamat in mind, let us try and address the god mentioned in Placidusax's remembrance, for there is no other mention of this god in the lore. As discussed, this god is presumably comparable to Marika, a vessel god
I don't have it.
Will,
I
supported
can't
by
say
Elder
it
Lord Placidusax,
because I don't have it.
and ruling over a more primal era
It's not.
of Greater Will rule.
It's
In
not on your
mythology,
keyboard,
Tiamat was married to Abzu. Now, Abzu,
or it's just
as a
not
concept,
programmed
is something I
into
discussed a
your
long,
operating
long
system.
time ago on my lore video for Dark Souls, where I discussed the Deep, and I will link that below if you are interested. However, we are talking about the personified Abzu in this sense, who is married to Tiamat. Abzu is the Sumerian god of the deep sea, of the abyss, the primeval sea below the underworld. In the Enuma Elish, a Babylonian epic on creation, Tiamat
How
and
did
her
you
husband,
lose it?
Asbu, are representative of the overland sea and the deep sea respectively, and the two mate by mixing their waters, giving birth to some of the first deities, before they are in turn murdered by their children, who overthrow them. In all of the mythologies that Abzu and Tiamat appear in, they are seen as primordial gods, who bore the first generation of deities. Given Placidusax's association with creation and early primeval chaotic life, it is fair to assume that this missing god will have taken a similar form, and ultimately will have been a god representative of primordial life. Perhaps the Enuma Elish also gives us insight into what happened to Placidusax and his god. Tiamat and Abzu were overthrown by their children, after all. Perhaps Placidusax and his god face an insurrection as well, from the other dragons, their children. At the end of the day, something did cause the terrible wound on Placidusax's form, and cut off his missing heads. Something drove their god away. We will discuss the collapse in Dragon Society in more detail, but let these speculative ideas percolate for now. Overall, I do view Placidusax as the progenitor, the leader of an age of primordial life. And with that said, let us now turn to the civilization that he and his children built, or should I say, the civilization that the Beastmen built on behalf of them. So now it is time for us to discuss the Beastmen of Farum Azula. At the start of this chapter, I would just like to shout out an excellent video by an extraordinary channel, and that channel is Tarnished Archaeologist, and specifically his video on Farum Azula. People have been recommending this channel to me for weeks, and boy is it a special one. The Tarnished Archaeologist goes hard in analysing environmental details, and their attention to detail is remarkable. I am going to directly reference their video in a moment for some specific details. However, I think it's important to note that their ideas have definitely influenced my ideas on Beastmen society and the timeline as a whole, so props to Tarnished Archaeologist. In their Farum Azula video, Tarnished Archaeologist makes a series of connections that lead us to conclude that Farum Azula and the civilization therein was the earliest civilization in the history of Elden Ring's world. Tarnished Archaeologist does this by analysing the burial practices of the Beastmen within Farum Azula, burial practices being one of the first indicators in human history of society becoming more complex, beyond the basics of hunter-gatherers. TA likens these burials to a real-world burial cache known as the Varna Necropolis in Bulgaria, and one cannot deny that these are clearly the real-world inspiration. The site is a 5th millennium BC burial site, where one of the burials showed a person of great importance, surrounded by many gold trinkets and objects.
Sorry, a lot of
TA
ads.
even goes out the way
Let me
to
show
do
you a photo.
side-by-side comparison,
Discord.
which highlights that the golden bracelets and the flat gold objects are identical to the burial found in Farum Azula. TA's conclusion as to what this means is that this society, Farum Azula society, must have been the earliest to realise the significance of gold, for the gold found in these graves must be unalloyed gold, due to the period of which the Varna burials took place, the Chalcolithic period, a period in which alloys were still not a thing, so the gold found in the Varna burials and in Farum Azula were unalloyed gold, the natural source of gold found throughout both of our worlds. This is a really insightful basis for the rest of this chapter, as it allows us to fully
How
comprehend
did you
how truly
lose
ancient
that and
this
your shift
civilization
key?
really was.
What did you do?
As I've said, the Tarnished Archaeologist refers to this as the Chalcolithic period. A
How could you?
transitional period
It's on a
between the
laptop. It's
Neolithic
not like I can
and the
just.
Bronze Age,
It's not the
thereby
same
fitting
way
into the notion
as in
of
like just
prehistory that we had discussed earlier
slamming
in
your
the video.
fist down on
Again,
a
for
modular
comparison,
keyboard and
in
then
the real world, the Varna burials
sending a few
are
keys
dated back
flying.
to the 5th millennium BC.
It's
This
like
is a
stuck
truly
on
old
there.
civilization.
How did you do that?
Again, I commend the Tarnished Archaeologist for this really insightful video, and really would plead with you to go and give them a subscribe and watch their content. These ideas of ancient burials and the allegorical comparisons to our own early cultures really gives the impressions of the first complex society,
That's
resulting from the first
insane.
species evolving and becoming more intelligent. This prehistoric society of the Dragon Empire
Anyways, I'm
can be
just
broken down
about
into
done with
three
this one.
component parts: the Beastmen and the Ancient Dragons.
Putting aside
And as
the
we can see from statuary, the dragons
miraculous
quite clearly held the dominant position, especially when one considers what we have discussed
breaking
in
of
the prior
a
chapters,
keyboard.
and the importance that the Elden Lord and the dragons had to this era. The Beastmen's lore really backs up the idea of an early formative society, as their minds begin to develop, as their lore gives us the impression that they were newly raised to intelligence at this time, and this is something we learn via the Bestial Vitality incantation, which reads, "Having gained intelligence, the beasts must have felt how their wildness slipped away as civilization took hold." So these beastmen were granted intelligence, and that means instead of having gained it naturally via evolution and over time, it seems as though instead they were granted
The pixel
their
have to like
intelligence,
change it. Yeah, that's
most likely
how it
by
is with
integrating
laptops.
well
It's not
with
modular.
the dragon's god. This is of course
That's
speculation,
actually why I don't have a
but I
laptop.
personally prefer the latter explanation, that it was the god of the dragons that granted the intelligence to the beastmen, Apart from anything else, it would explain why the Beastmen venerate the dragons so dearly, as we can clearly see in the statuary found around Far Missoula, and by the very existence of Far Missoula clergy via the Cinque Dea. Regardless of who ever granted their intelligence, the intelligence granted to the Beastmen allowed them to behave much as our ancestors did, by using their hands to use tools. And as Tarnished Archaeologist points out, this advent of tool use is celebrated by the Cinque Dea, which reads as follows. The design celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, symbolic of the intelligence once granted upon their kind. The Cinque Dea is based on an Italian short sword of the same name in real life, with its name meaning 5 fingers, so named as a result of the width of the blade as it is next to the guard.
Wrong, but oh, you're getting fucked. You're absolutely getting fucked over.
Ring, as we can see 5
yeah,
fingers
that's
along the bottom of the blade.
Everything's more expensive with a Chromebook.
This sword is clearly meant to represent the advent of tool use.
Yeah, don't repair it. You're gonna go bankrupt.
Their 5 fingers to wrap their fingers around tools, such as this blade. The use of tools in this manner is the pivotal.
I mean, if you want to repair it, like by all means, go ahead. But fair warning, it's gonna cost you not just an arm and a leg. It's going to cost you your soul. You're gonna be signing. You're gonna be signing away a deal for the devil.
From the classic 2001: A Space Odyssey. This film from 1968 is based on a short story called The Sentinel, and in essence charts humanity's history from primate to space travel, with one main notable difference. The film suggests that our evolution was guided by an alien intelligence, marked by strange unnatural obelisks, or sentinels, that appear at pivotal moments in human development to guide and teach us. In the film, the first instance of this happening happens to our ancestors, the homonyms. The film opens with a tribe of homonyms being driven from their watering hole by a rival tribe, before coming across this unnatural alien obelisk. They eventually find the courage to touch the obelisk before they all retreat. Not long after, one of their number is inspired for some reason to take up a bone and use it as a tool, a smashing implement. With tools in hand, the tribe of these hominins return to the waterhole they had been chased away from, and easily defeat and drive off their rivals with these new weapons. The film then cuts away and skips forward millions of years later to an era of space travel, the implication being that it was intelligent intervention that put the tool in the hands of our ancestors, and thus provided the foundations for our development into a sentient, intelligent species. And it is how
and it only took
between the Beastmen
2
and the dragons
hours.
/ the Greater Will. Upon being granted intelligence,
$60.
it looks as though the Beastmen will have used their 5 fingers to pick up stone tools, as suggested by Tarnished Archaeologist, who points out the bestial sling incantation, which reads as follows. It is said that in the time before
that's 3 of them.
Stones were the first weapons of the beasts who had gained intelligence. This again reinforces the extremely early period of civilization that the Beastmen represent.
I'm hungry. I'm gonna go make food.
And weapons, much like the real world.
I will be right back.
Marked the beginning of our ancestors.
I'm not sure what I'm gonna make though.
Of which many are believed.
I did finish the 3rd one.
But it is fascinating because we see the Beastmen developing more and more advanced tools and working with more advanced materials as time goes on. And in essence, their journey represents the entirety of the world's prehistory period, i.e. the Stone Age, moving from the use of stone tools into the later period of the Chalcolithic, as we discussed earlier. However, we can also track their development beyond this, into what we would know as the Iron Age, or the early ancient historical era. For the Beastmen that we actually fight do not use stone weapons, they use weapons made of iron. Such as described by the Beastman's cleaver.
Which one's the newest one?
Curved greatsword of colossal size, forged of dull iron, and wielded by the Beastmen of Far Missoula. The blade is incredibly heavy, but well balanced, comparatively easy to wield for the damage it delivers. It is clear the Beastmen possess knowledge beyond human ken. This makes us think of the Iron Age, which followed the Bronze Age, and is really seen as the true transitional period from prehistory
are the old
to
ones.
ancient history.
This is the new one.
While iron is a natural element, using iron in a manner that allows it to be used as a tool or a weapon requires more advanced science And I think in this case, Wikipedia is
I'm gonna
apt
stay here because I'm gonna
for
try and paint
describing why the
one
use
more.
of iron and the advent of the
But
Iron Age marked a true
I am
transitional
going
period
to go
in human
eat.
society,
I'm hungry.
as it states the following.
Alright,
In
I'll be right back.
archaeology, the Iron Age refers to the advent of ferrous metallurgy. The adoption of iron coincided with other changes in some past cultures, often including more sophisticated agricultural practices, religious beliefs, and artistic style.
Oh, well, that's why. Because it wasn't working. just want to say thank you for coming to stream. I'm gonna head out. I'm not feeling too good. I hope you all have an amazing night. Bye.